11:27 at night. December 6, 1991. A 13-year-old girl tried to crawl to safety while the world around her burned. She didn't make it. Her name was Amy, and for 34 years, the man who killed her walked free while innocent people went to prison for what he did. Type in the comments right now where you're watching from and what time it is over there. Hit that like button. Share this video with everyone you know. Subscribe to Dark Pulse and turn on notifications. Because what you're about to hear is the story of how a single shell casing waited 34 years in a floor drain to reveal the truth. This is Dark Pulse. The yogurt machines had stopped humming. The last customer was long gone. Inside a small frozen yogurt shop on West Anderson Lane in North Austin, the only sounds were the quiet ones. Water running in a sink. A mop handle tapping against a bucket. The soft scrape of chairs being lifted onto tables. These were the sounds of a normal Friday night. The sounds of 4 girls finishing up and getting ready to go home. Then a sound that did not belong. A series of sharp, dry pops that cut through the hum of the freezers. A rookie patrol officer named Troy Gay was driving past the strip mall when he saw the smoke. Thin at first, barely a smudge against the dark December sky. Then thicker, darker, rising from the back of the yogurt shop. He pulled closer. And that is when he heard them. Those pops. He did not know what they were. Not yet. He called it in as a fire. Dispatch sent the trucks. Within minutes, firefighters were through the door. The front of the shop looked untouched. Chairs stacked on tables. Yogurt machines standing still behind the counter. Everything neat. Everything quiet. Like the night had ended the way it was supposed to. But the back of that shop was a different world entirely. 15 minutes away, a homicide sergeant named John Jones was sitting in a van with a local television news crew. They were filming a documentary about crime in Texas. The camera was already rolling. The lens grainy. The footage shaky. The kind of picture you only get from 1991 equipment. Then his radio crackled to life. 2900 West Anderson Lane. Possible homicide. The van changed direction. When it pulled into the parking lot, the camera captured everything it could. The flashing red and blue lights bouncing off wet pavement. The smoke still thick in the air. The faces of the officers standing outside, every single one of them pale and quiet and staring at nothing. But the camera could not see what was waiting inside the smoke. Jones stepped out and walked toward the door. The fire department had just knocked down the flames, but the air inside was still heavy. Water covered the floor. Smoke hung in layers near the ceiling. Inside, the world had turned to ash. No color, just muted grays, blacks, and the heavy smell of burnt sugar and something sharp and metallic underneath it. A smell that did not belong in a yogurt shop. Then he saw her, a girl near the restroom. She was on the floor, not lying flat, not curled up. She was frozen in a crawling position, her arms stretched forward, her body facing away from the back of the shop, reaching toward the door, toward the outside, toward anything that was not this room. She didn't make it. Her name was Amy. She was 13 years old, the youngest person in that building. And in the last moments of her life, she had tried to drag herself to safety while the world around her burned. She got as far as the prep area near the restroom, just a few feet from the door that led outside. That is where it ended for her. Evidence showed that she had been restrained and subjected to extreme violence before her life was taken. It was clear this was no ordinary robbery. The scene inside was beyond comprehension. The victims had been bound with their own clothing and silenced with makeshift gags. It was a cold, calculated execution that left the investigators in a state of shock. It was a level of cruelty that the city of Austin had never witnessed before. Jones stood in the middle of that room, water dripping from the ceiling, smoke curling in the corners. The camera crew behind him recording footage that would one day be played inside a courtroom. And the only thought in his mind was the faces of those girls. I can still see the inside of that place. That stuff is burned in my mind forever. There has never been in Austin a more ugly crime. Comment below, what would you do if you were the investigator that night? Forensic analysis revealed that 2 different weapons were used in the attack. The ballistic evidence suggested that more than one person may have been involved in the final moments of the girls' lives. 2 different weapons on the same 13-year-old girl suggested something worse than a robbery gone wrong. It suggested a level of cruelty closer to an execution. And proving any of it was going to be almost impossible. The fire had swallowed the evidence. Smoke and soot coated every surface. The firefighters had blasted the back of the shop with high-pressure hoses. But the water meant to save that shop became the best thing that ever happened to the killer. It washed away the only traces he might have left behind. Footprints. Fingerprints. Fibers. Jones knew right then this was not going to be a normal case. He called every federal resource he could reach. That same night, information about the two guns went out to law enforcement across the country. And then the detectives found one more thing. The front door of the yogurt shop was locked from the inside. The key still in the lock. Part of the closing routine. But the back door was unlocked. Wide open. Leading straight out into a dark alleyway behind the strip mall. A man through the back. He did what he came to do. And when it was over, he walked out that same door and disappeared into the alley. No one saw his face. No camera caught a single frame. In a city where everyone locked their front doors to feel safe, they forgot about the alley. They forgot about the back. By morning, Austin woke up to the worst crime it had ever known. Less than 3 weeks before Christmas. And the man who did this was already gone. Miles away. Moving through the dark like he had done this before. But only 2 of those girls were supposed to be in that shop. The other 2 had no reason to be there at all. Share this video right now. You need to hear their stories. They were 4 friends in a shop filled with bright lights and cold treats. They did not know that the darkness had already walked in through the back. Jennifer Harbison was 17 years old, a senior in high school, the kind of girl who was already thinking about what came next. She worked at the yogurt shop because she wanted her own money. She was responsible. She showed up on time. She did her job without being asked twice. On that Friday night, she was scheduled to close up the shop, same as she had done many times before. Her sister Sarah was 15, a freshman. She was the younger one, still figuring things out. She played sports. She joined clubs. She was doing all the things a 15-year-old is supposed to do. Having fun, making friends, being a kid. Jennifer and Sarah were the only children their parents had. Barbara Harbison had built her entire world around those 2 girls. Every plan she had for the future, every dream she carried was connected to Jennifer and Sarah. They were not just her daughters. They were everything. Eliza Thomas was also 17. She was the supervisor at the yogurt shop that night, the one in charge. Eliza loved animals. She had a pig that she was raising to enter in a livestock show just a few months later. She had a younger sister named Sonora who looked up to her more than anyone in the world. Sonora was 13 years old, the same age as the youngest girl found in that shop. And then there was Amy Ayers, 13, the baby of the group. Amy was a country girl at heart, beloved every animal she ever met. She wanted to grow up and become a veterinarian. Her father, Bob, called her his girl. She had her whole life stretched out in front of her. All of it waiting. All of it gone. Amy was not supposed to be there that night. Neither was Sarah. That Friday evening, Sarah and Amy had been at North Cross Mall, 2 blocks from the yogurt shop. When they were ready to go home, they walked over to catch a ride with Jennifer after she finished closing. A series of tiny, ordinary choices led them to that door. A missed ride. A decision to walk over instead of calling someone else. A few extra minutes at the mall. If the clock had been 5 minutes faster, 2 of those girls would have gone home that night. But the clock was not faster. Eliza and Jennifer were the only 2 scheduled to work that night. They had done this closing routine dozens of times. Lock the front door from the inside and leave the key in the lock so you don't forget it. Stack the chairs on the tables. Count the money. Drop the cash in the safe. Wipe down the counters. Fill the mop bucket. Clean the floors. Then walk out the front, lock it, slide the key into an envelope, and push it under the door. They could probably do it with their eyes closed. But that night, there were 4 girls instead of 2. And the killer could not have known that. He may have been watching. He may have known 2 employees would be inside after the doors were locked. But 2 extra girls walking in at the last minute for a ride home was something no one could have planned for. It was chance. The worst kind. The closing routine told investigators exactly when the attack happened. Chairs already stacked. Water in the sink. A mop bucket half full. They were in the middle of cleaning. They never finished. Either the killer came in through the unlocked back door while they were busy, or he was already there. Maybe he had walked in before closing, sat in a booth, watched the last customers leave, and when the front door was locked and the girls turned their backs, he was still sitting in the corner, watching the clock, patient, knowing exactly what he was about to do. Either way, by the time they realized something was wrong, the front door was locked, and he was between them and the only way out. Hit that subscribe button. The families are about to receive the worst news of their lives. The news reached the families in the middle of the night. Phone calls that shattered everything. Barbara Harbison lost both of her daughters. Not one, both. Jennifer and Sarah, her only children, gone in the same room on the same night. She would later say something that still echoes more than 3 decades later. My life was sort of focused around them. From here until eternity. Someone took eternity away from me. Let that sit for a moment. Someone took eternity away from her. Bob Ayers lost his little girl. The one who wanted to be a vet. The one who loved every animal she ever met. He would never see her graduate. Never watch her walk into veterinary school. Never see her grow up. All he had left were the memories of who she was and the dreams of who she was going to be. I want to see her graduate. I want to see her become a veterinarian. She was a daddy's girl. And then there was Sonora Thomas, Eliza's little sister, 13 years old. When she found out her big sister was gone, her mind refused to accept it. For days, Sonora kept telling herself that Eliza had somehow escaped, that she had run away, that any minute now, she would come walking back through the front door, alive and okay, and ready to come home. I remember fantasizing for days that my sister had somehow escaped and run away, and that she was going to come back. That is what I was holding on to. Eliza never came back, and something inside the Thomas family broke in a way that could never be fixed. They stopped talking about her, not just for weeks, forever. Eliza's name disappeared from the dinner table, from car rides, from bedtime conversations. The silence was the only way they could survive. My family never talked about my sister after she died. Never. It is too painful. The killer did not just take 4 girls that night. He took the ability of the people who loved them to even speak their names. While the families retreated into silence, the city was screaming for answers. Billboards went up on highways. Candlelight vigils on street corners. A $25,000 reward that would later climb to $100,000. The tip line barely stopped ringing. 342 people were eventually listed as suspects. And the very first Real lead came just 8 days later. North Cross Mall. The same mall where Sarah and Amy had been the night they walked to the yogurt shop and never came home. A 16-year-old was stopped by security with a loaded .22 caliber revolver in his pocket. The same type of gun used on those girls. His name was Maurice Pierce. The one with the gun. After hours of questioning, after photographs of the dead girls were pushed across the table into his 16-year-old face, Maurice gave a statement. He said he was the driver, the getaway car, and he named 3 friends who he said were responsible. Forrest Wellborn, the quiet one. Michael Scott, the follower. Robert Springsteen, the one Maurice said pulled the trigger. For the first time since that night, the task force had names, faces, a direction. The story crumbled almost immediately. Comment below. Do you think a 16-year-old could handle this kind of interrogation? Detectives wired Maurice with a hidden microphone and sent him to meet Forrest while investigators listened from a van nearby. Maurice asked him straight, "Were you serious when you said you killed those girls?" Forrest said no. He had been joking. Then he said something that hit the detectives like a wall. "How could I have done it? I was with you all night." Forrest had no idea what Maurice was talking about. When detectives questioned Michael Scott and Robert Springsteen, they denied everything too. All 4 were released. Not enough evidence. But their names stayed on the list. And so the search went deeper. And the more desperate it became, the further it strayed from the truth. 2 months in, police raided the home of a woman connected to a local occult group. Tips said members had been talking about the murders. Officers broke through the door and found rat bones and theatrical props. People playing make-believe. It was not a breakthrough. It was a sign the case was falling apart. Then came the Mexico lead. And for a moment, the entire country thought it was over. A composite sketch had been drawn of a man that multiple witnesses said they saw sitting in a car outside the yogurt shop the night of the murders. When detectives from the sex crimes unit saw that sketch, they stopped cold. They had one that looked almost identical. 3 weeks before the yogurt shop murders, a young woman in Austin had been kidnapped and assaulted. Sketches of 3 wanted men had been released. One of them was a near-perfect match. A tip placed the wanted men in Mexico. 2 were caught and arrested. And then the Mexican authorities made an announcement that echoed to every newsroom in the country. The men had confessed to the yogurt shop murders. Mexico said they would try them for the crime. National headlines. Breaking news. The families dared to believe. But those confessions were paper justice. They looked good on a page, but didn't match the blood on the floor. The caliber of guns they described was incorrect. The layout of the shop was wrong. When Jones flew to Mexico and re-interviewed the men, they took back nearly everything. The confessions had likely been forced out of them. Another lead that gave the families hope and then ripped it away. And this kept happening. Over the next 3 years, 6 different people confessed to the yogurt shop murders. 6. All written. All on record. 6 people sat in interrogation rooms and admitted to one of the worst crimes in Austin history. And every single one of them was lying. Not one confession held up. Not one matched the evidence. The word confession had lost all meaning in this case. And that fact would matter more than anyone realized when the story picked back up years later. Jones was grinding down. In '94, after 3 years leading the investigation, he was moved out of homicide. He had made a promise to the families on the night of the murders. He had worn a green and white shirt that night and told them the next time they saw him wearing it, it would mean they knew who did it. 3 years later, that shirt was still unworn. It went into his closet and it stayed there. Fresh detectives took over. But fresh eyes brought no fresh answers. The months turned into years. The tip line went quiet. The billboards came down one by one. The yogurt shop murders slowly faded from the front pages of the newspapers. But they never faded from the families. Share this video. The case is about to take a dark turn. Every case we cover is more than just a story. It's the result of weeks spent digging through records and verifying facts to honor the lives lost. Each episode takes nearly 15 days of research to ensure the truth is never forgotten. If you believe these stories deserve to be told, please like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. Your support is what keeps this investigation going. For more solved cold cases, check the links in the description. Now back to the case. Amy's mother, Pam, spoke to reporters in '96. 5 years. No arrests. No suspects. No answers. They are probably out there leading a life as normal as they have ever had. And ours is never going to be the same. That same year, Eliza's mother, Maria, packed up and moved away from Austin. She couldn't take it anymore. Running into people on the street who constantly asked about the case. The reminders on every corner. She left the city where her daughter had been taken from her because staying was its own kind of punishment. For 5 more years, nothing happened. The case sat in a filing cabinet. And the man who killed those girls remained free, somewhere in the world. Then in October 1999, a new team of detectives reopened the case. They believed the original investigators had the right suspects all along. And they had a plan to prove it. There was no new forensic evidence. Not a fingerprint. Not a fiber. All they had was a theory and a weapon to execute it. A detective named Hector Polanco. Polanco was a confession machine. The interrogator who always got his man. But there was a shadow behind that record. In '88, he had interrogated 2 men named Christopher Ochoa and Richard Danziger. Both confessed. Both were convicted. Both received life sentences. Years later, both were exonerated. Polanco had broken 2 innocent men and sent them to prison for crimes they never committed. A colleague would later say something that should have been a warning. I have seen him get confessions from people who had nothing to do with the crime. This was the man they put in the room with Michael Scott. Scott was 24 now, married, living in Austin. A detective had already contacted him earlier that year. Scott said he was innocent. He knew nothing about the murders. But the new team was not satisfied. They brought in more detectives. And then they brought in Polanco, one after another, day after day, for days of questioning. And after what Scott would later describe as an endless cycle of pressure and exhaustion, he broke. He gave an 8-page written statement, 18 hours of recorded interviews. He described going to the yogurt shop to rob it. Maurice with the .22. Robert with the .380. Forrest outside as lookout. They entered through the back door that had been left open. The robbery went wrong. The girls were tied up. They cried. The guns went off. They set the fire and drove away. They hid under a bridge where Scott said he threw up. That same weekend, they stole a Pathfinder and drove to San Antonio. Some details seemed impossible for an innocent person to know. Scott described the front door being locked from the inside. He mentioned the drop safe. He said the girls had been stacked on top of each other. He said the fire had been started directly on the bodies. These were things that had never been made public. There are only 2 possibilities. Either Scott was in that shop and knew those details because he was there, or the detectives gave them to him piece by piece, hour after hour, over 4 days. The tapes tell their own story. His account kept shifting. Conflicting details about the layout of the shop. different descriptions of how the girls were harmed. At one point, a detective introduced a key fact, asking if one of the girls had been shot not once, but twice. Scott agreed, but he had not offered that himself. It was handed to him. Then it became part of his confession. Detectives drove around with him, trying to find the bridge he described. They couldn't find it. But the detectives went further than pressure. They went inside his mind. Both Scott and later Springsteen were told that memories can get locked, and that with the right effort, those memories could be unlocked. Both men were hypnotized. A psychologist named Dr. Robert Schmer would later testify that telling a suspect his memories could be unlocked was not just unethical, it was dangerous. It could make a person genuinely believe they committed an act they never did. The detectives were not just asking questions anymore. They were reaching into their minds and rewriting what they remembered. By the end, Michael Scott did not know where the truth ended and the detective story began. He would later try to explain what it felt like. There were psychological aspects I still don't understand. I did think for a while that I had something to do with this crime. Think about that for a second. An innocent man, after 4 days in a room with people who lied to him and manipulated him and told him his own memories were locked, came out genuinely believing he might be a murderer. Hit that like button. This gets worse. Springsteen was interrogated for 5 straight hours in West Virginia. For most of that time, he denied everything. He was not there. He had nothing to do with it. But the detectives kept pushing. They told him the .22 had been matched to the crime. It had not been. They told him Scott had already given them everything. They fed him details and waited for him to repeat them back. And after 5 hours of lies and pressure, Springsteen broke too. Under intense pressure, he gave a statement. He admitted to being involved in the attack and described specific details about the crime scene that only someone present that night, or someone fed those details, could know. He described Amy's position on the floor, the same crawling position investigators had found her in on the night of the crime. Did he know that position because he was standing over her that night, or because somewhere during those 5 hours someone described it to him, and he gave it back to them as his own memory? His attorney, Joe James Sawyer, had no doubt. They terrorized him, and he was afraid to say no. Springsteen himself would say it years later. I was berated and berated until they got what they wanted. They were not going to let me leave. They broke me down. When Jones heard about the arrests, he thought about the green and white shirt. Almost reached for it. Then he learned there was nothing behind the confessions except pressure. No forensic link. No weapon. Nothing. He closed the closet door. Forrest Wellborn was brought before 2 separate grand juries. Both times, the grand jury looked at the evidence against him. Both times, they refused to indict. There was nothing there. The charges were dismissed. But by then it was too late. His face had already been on the news. His name had already been connected to the worst crime in Austin history. He had been shown on television in handcuffs, tears running down his cheeks. Forrest lost his business. His life as he knew it was over. 2 grand juries said he was not guilty. The public didn't care. The weight of the system had been crushing Maurice Pierce since that first night at 16 years old. It never let up. The paranoia, the anger, the deep distrust of anyone in a uniform. Friends said the damage from those early interrogations became the center of his personality. Years later, during a routine traffic stop, Maurice stabbed an officer. The officer fought back and shot him. He died on the street. Some of the victims' families said he got what he deserved. Amy's father said he had hoped to one day see him in prison. But the truth was simpler and sadder than either of those things. He was not what the system had spent years telling the world he was. That left Scott and Springsteen. In 2001, nearly 10 years after the murders, the trials began. Both were tried separately. Both faced the death penalty. And the only evidence the prosecution had were those confessions. No fingerprints. No weapon recovered. No forensic link of any kind. Just words spoken in interrogation rooms after days of relentless pressure. Comment below. Should confessions alone be enough to convict someone? Prosecutors knew the confessions alone might not be enough. So they used a strategy that seemed clever at the time, but would eventually destroy the entire case. Since the men were tried separately, prosecutors read parts of one man's confession at the other man's trial. At Springsteen's trial, the jury heard what Scott had said. At Scott's trial, the jury heard what Springsteen had said. Each confession appeared to confirm the other. 2 men, 2 separate statements, both telling a similar story. To a jury, it looked like proof. But neither man took the stand at the other's trial. That meant neither could be cross-examined about the words being used against them. Springsteen's lawyer could not question Scott about his statement. Scott's lawyer could not challenge Springsteen about his. Springsteen's attorney, Joe James Sawyer, called it exactly what it was. Massively unfair. Done systematically and with deliberation. The trial lasted 3 weeks. The jury deliberated for 13 hours. And then they returned with their verdict. Guilty of capital murder. Robert Springsteen was sent to death row. A man whose DNA would later prove he was never inside that yogurt shop was now sitting in a cell waiting to be executed for what happened there. The following year, Michael Scott went to trial. Convicted. Life in prison. For the families, it was the first full breath they had taken in a decade. Maria Thomas, Eliza's mother, spoke with the kind of certainty that comes from years of grief and desperation. They were there, and they actually did the murders. Then the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals ruled. 5-4. Both convictions overturned. The Sixth Amendment, the constitutional right to confront your accuser, had been violated. Scott never faced Springsteen on the witness stand. Springsteen never faced Scott. Their words had been used against each other in separate courtrooms where neither man could fight back. Maria Thomas heard the news, and something inside her shattered. Every time I hear those words that their rights were violated, I feel like I am going to go insane. Their rights were violated. Our girls were murdered. It ruins your sense of fairness. It ruins your sense that we live in a just world. But the collapse was not finished. A new district attorney, Rosemary Lemberg, took over. She wanted to retry both men. To build a stronger case, her office ordered DNA testing on evidence collected from the victims back in '91. A type of testing called YSDR, which searches specifically for male DNA. A partial male profile was recovered from one of the girls believed to have been assaulted. The results came back and no one was ready for what they said. The DNA matched none of the suspects. Not Scott. Not Springsteen. Not Pierce. Not Wellborn. None of them. And Springsteen had said in his confession that he assaulted one of the girls. But the DNA found on that victim did not belong to him. The science said he was never there. Everything the detectives had built. Everything the juries had believed. Everything the families had held on to for a decade was undone by a lab result. All charges were dropped. Scott and Springsteen walked out of prison after nearly 10 years behind bars. But they were not exonerated. The door was left open for a possible retrial. They were free. But the stain of the accusation followed them into the sunlight. The case was right back where it started. And the only clue was the DNA of a stranger sitting in a lab, belonging to a man no one had ever seen. But that DNA was patient. And one day, the technology would catch up to it. Share this video everywhere. The real killer is about to be revealed. The DNA had no name, no face, no match in any database in the country. It was just a partial male profile recovered from one of the victims. A ghost in the evidence. But it was real. And it belonged to someone who had been inside that yogurt shop the night those girls were killed. If the suspects didn't leave that DNA, then who did? Defense attorney Amber Fairley had spent years on this question. She had gone through every witness statement from the night of the murders. 2 figures kept appearing. 2 men that no one had ever identified. Multiple witnesses described seeing 2 men inside the yogurt shop just before closing. They were wearing fatigue-colored jackets. They sat slouched over a table, whispering to each other in what was described as a very close, quiet conversation. A married couple who had been in the shop that night said the men kept watching their own reflections in the glass window. And when the girls started locking up, those 2 men were still sitting there. They were never found. They never came forward. No one ever learned their names. But one witness gave a clearer picture than anyone else. His name was Darryl Croft. He owned a private security company. On the night of the murders, around 10 o'clock in the evening, he had stopped by the yogurt shop to grab something to eat. While he waited in line, a man approached him and asked a strange question. "Are you a cop?" Croft said no. The man stepped to the counter. He ordered only a soda. Nothing else. Then he walked past the counter, past the yogurt machines, through the doorway that led to the back of the shop, toward the storage area and the restroom. And he never came back. Croft noticed. He asked Eliza Thomas why she had let a stranger walk behind the counter and into the back. Eliza, kind as she was, said the man just wanted to use the restroom. She didn't think twice about it. She was 17 years old, trusting and doing her job. She had no reason to be afraid of a man asking for the bathroom. But Croft felt something. A gut instinct built from years of security work. Something was not right about that man. So he stayed. He sat in the yogurt shop for about 20 minutes. Watching. Waiting. Making sure the girls were safe before he left. The man in the fatigue jacket never walked back out. Croft later described him in detail. White male. About 6 feet tall. Medium build. Dark hair. Pointy nose. Deep voice. No facial hair. Mid to late 20s. He attended lineups over the years. Was shown photographs of every suspect who had been arrested. Could not identify any of them. Because the man he saw was not a teenager. He was a grown man. Calm and deliberate. The kind of person who asks a 17-year-old girl for permission to use the restroom and then vanishes into the back of a building where 4 teenagers are about to be left alone. That description sat in the case files for years. Collecting dust. Waiting for a name. In 2017, an Austin police investigator searched a public online DNA database and got a hit. The partial profile from the yogurt shop appeared to match a sample already in the system. For the first time in over 25 years, there was a potential connection to a real person. But there was no name. The matching sample had been uploaded anonymously by the FBI. It belonged to a federally convicted offender or detainee. And under federal privacy laws, the FBI refused to reveal the identity. Austin investigators pushed. The FBI held firm. It was a wall of red tape standing between the families and the truth. Frustrated officials turned to United States Congressman Michael McCall. He pressed the FBI for years. Back and forth. Request after request. Finally, in 2020, the FBI agreed to conduct further testing. The original crime scene sample had only 16 markers. 16 is weak. Millions of people could share that profile. The new testing produced 25. And then the case collapsed again. Some of the new markers did not match. The FBI sent a letter making it official. The male donor of their sample was conclusively excluded. What had looked like the biggest break in the history of this case was another dead end. Hit that like button. Everything is about to change. Sonora Thomas, who had been 13 when her sister was taken from her, spent years battling panic attacks and physical pain she couldn't explain. Therapy helped her understand that all of it was connected to the murder. She took that understanding and built something from it. She became a therapist herself, helping others carry the kind of invisible wounds she had carried since childhood. When she got married, she placed a single flower and an empty chair at the ceremony. The chair where her big sister should have been sitting. In 2015, Sonora lost her mother too. Maria Thomas, who had moved away from Austin because the reminders were too painful, who had sat in a courtroom and watched convictions be handed down and then ripped away, passed away without ever knowing who killed Eliza. There was a kind of torture that continues by the fact that it is unsolved. It is ongoing. It is always there. Jones had retired, moved out of Texas, but retirement brought no peace. He still had insomnia 30 years later. He still carried the weight of what he saw that night. And the promise he made to the families still hung over him, unfulfilled. Then in 2022, a detective named Dan Jackson picked up the file. He was methodical, patient. Unlike some of the investigators before him, Jackson did not come in with a theory he needed to prove. He went back through every confession, every witness statement, every forensic report. He found inconsistencies in the suspect's statements that previous detectives had missed or chosen to ignore. He was not chasing a narrative. He was chasing the truth. And Jackson had something no detective before him ever had. Access to databases and DNA technology that simply did not exist in 91 or 2001 or even 2017. He focused on one piece of evidence. Something small. Something that had been collected on the night of the murders, cataloged, and filed away in storage for over 30 years. A single .380 caliber shell casing found in a floor drain inside the yogurt shop. It had been sitting there the whole time, waiting for someone to ask the right question. Jackson submitted that casing to the National Integrated Ballistic Information Network, a database that links firearms and shell casings to crime scenes across the entire country. And the same afternoon, his phone rang. A hit. An unsolved murder from 1998 in Kentucky. The .380 caliber weapon that had been fired inside a yogurt shop in Austin had apparently been used again 7 years later, hundreds of miles away, in a completely different state. A weapon that crossed state lines. A killer who did the same. Jackson flew to Kentucky with members of the cold case unit and a representative from the Attorney General's office. When they sat down with the detectives there and laid the two cases side by side, the similarities were disturbing. The method, the violence, the way the victims were found, the way they had been treated before they died. This was not a coincidence. This was a pattern, and the pattern belonged to one person. But Jackson was not done. He did something no investigator had ever attempted before. He contacted every single lab in the country that performs YSDR DNA analysis. Everyone. And he asked them all the same question. Can you manually search your database against the unknown male profile from the yogurt shop case? It was a long shot, a needle in a haystack. He was asking labs across America to go through their records by hand and compare them against a profile from a 30-year-old crime in Texas. Most came back empty, but one responded. The South Carolina State Lab. 27 out of 27 markers. Full profile. Every allele identical. Not a partial hit. Not a probability. A perfect match. The kind of result that leaves no room for doubt. The lab needed 2 weeks to verify. No one in the facility's history had ever received a request like this. They wanted every step to hold up in court. Those were the longest 2 weeks of Jackson's career. He knew he had somebody. He just couldn't be told who. Not yet. On August 22nd, the lab sent the name. Robert Eugene Brashers. Matched to a 1990 sexual assault and murder in Greenville, South Carolina. Jackson called Greenville immediately. The detective on the other end knew nothing about the yogurt shop. But before Jackson could explain, the detective asked one question. Were your victims bound with their own clothing? The hair stood up on the back of Jackson's neck. That was the signature. The thread that connected everything. Comment below. How does a shell casing wait 34 years to solve a case? Robert Eugene Brashers. Convicted of beating and shooting a woman in Florida in '85. He served 3.5 years. Released in '89. The system let him out, and he went right back to what he knew. In 1990, he walked into an apartment in Greenville, South Carolina. He assaulted the woman inside. Beat her. Strangled her. She did not survive. In '91, the yogurt shop. In '97, he broke into a home near Memphis, Tennessee. A 14-year-old girl was inside. He assaulted her. In '98, he entered a home in Missouri. A mother named Sherry Scherer and her 12-year-old daughter, Megan, were inside. He tied them up and ended both their lives. That same day, he forced his way into another home in Dyersburg, Tennessee, and shot a woman. She survived. Later that year, he was arrested in Arkansas for trying to break into yet another woman's home. In January 1999, during a standoff with police at a motel, Brashers turned a 380 on himself. 8 months earlier, 4 innocent men had been arrested and charged with the crime he committed. He died knowing someone else was being blamed for what he did. And there was one more detail. One that had been buried in old records for over 30 years. Less than 48 hours after the yogurt shop murders, Brashers was stopped at a border patrol checkpoint between El Paso and Las Cruces, nearly 600 miles from Austin. He was driving a car that had been reported stolen in Georgia. And inside that car, officers found a .380 pistol. Same type, same caliber, the same kind of weapon that had just been used to end the lives of 4 teenage girls. He was charged with auto theft and being a felon in possession of a firearm. The gun ended up with his father. 48 hours. The answer was right there at the beginning, sitting in the front seat of a stolen car 600 miles down the road. And it slipped through. He had faked his own death once, published a fake obituary, used aliases, vanished for weeks. His daughter described him as a man who lived a double life, a predator hiding in plain sight. The DNA was found on 3 of the victims. The ballistics linked his weapon across state lines. A .380 in his car 2 days after the crime. And the gun he used to end his own life was consistent with the casing that had waited 34 years in a drain to be heard. September 29, 2025, the mayor of Austin stood at the podium and spoke words the city had waited over 3 decades to hear. The police chief stepped forward and said the name out loud. Robert Eugene Brashers. The only physical evidence located at that scene has been matched to him. The case was classified as exceptionally cleared. They could prove he did it. But he had been dead since '99. There would be no arrest, no trial, no handcuffs, no courtroom, no jury, just the truth. And for the families who had waited 34 years, the truth was enough. A family member stepped to the microphone. Her voice broke, but the words were steady. All we ever wanted was the truth. We never wanted anyone to go to jail for something they did not do. Vengeance was never it. It was always the truth. She spoke about the officers who had stood by the families for 3 decades. The ones who never stopped working. The ones who never stopped caring. People do not understand how hard they work. Bob Ayers, Amy's father, walked up to Detective Jackson. He placed a small pen in his hand. For words we will never forget. The killer's daughter, Deborah, had been 8 when her father took his life. She did not understand who he was until 2018. When she heard about the yogurt shop, she cried, "I am very sorry for the pain my father has put everyone through. I wish he was here to be punished for his crimes." She called him a wolf in sheep's clothing. Scott and Springsteen were finally cleared in the eyes of the world. Nearly 10 years in prison for something they never did. Scott had sat on death row, waiting to be executed for a crime committed by a man who was already dead by the time the verdict came in. Their lawyers sought $80,000 for every year behind bars. But no amount of money could give back what was taken. No check could return their 20s. No apology could erase what happened in those interrogation rooms. Scott once said something that showed the true depth of the damage. "I did think for a while that I had something to do with this crime. They didn't just take his freedom. They reached into his mind and rewired it until he believed he was guilty of something he never did. That is not justice. That is not even failure. That is something worse." Sonora Thomas lost her sister at 13. She fell apart. Drugs, alcohol, hospitalization, boarding school. Then she rebuilt herself piece by piece. Became a therapist. Helped others carry wounds she knew too well. She placed an empty chair at her wedding where Eliza should have been sitting. Her mother, Maria, never got to hear this announcement. She passed away in 2015, still not knowing who killed her daughter. And then there was John Jones, the first detective, the man who walked into that yogurt shop on December 6, 1991, with a camera crew rolling behind him. 34 years of insomnia. 34 years of carrying those images. The green and white shirt. Worn once. The night of the murders. He had promised the families he would wear it again only when they found the killer. For 34 years, that shirt hung in a closet, waiting in the dark, just like the families, just like the evidence. Now, finally, John Jones could take it off the hanger. A 13-year-old girl who tried to crawl to safety and didn't make it. A mother who lost both her daughters in the same room. A sister who stopped speaking her name because the pain was too deep. A father who never got to watch his little girl grow up. A detective who wore a shirt once and waited 34 years to put it on again. And a single shell casing in a floor drain that waited just as long to speak. The truth took 34 years to arrive. But it arrived. Hit that like button. Share this video with everyone. Subscribe to Dark Pulse and turn on every notification. Now, we want to hear from you. Do you think the men who were wrongfully accused deserve compensation for the years they lost? If this technology had existed in 1991, how many lives could have been saved? Not just those girls, but every person Brashers went on to harm after that night. This case took 34 years to solve. Which other mystery do you think is one DNA match away from being closed? Tell us in the comments.